Hi, my name is David Lind. I'm an independent mental health services trainer and consultant. I'm here working with the state of Missouri on these training tips and tapes for people who work on Assertive Community Treatment ACT TAY teams, TAY for Transitional Age Youth. In this tape, we're going to talk about the idea of using the stages of change model as an important strategy for staff who work on the ACT TAY teams as they work with clients. One of the things we know about the stages of change model, it's well researched, originally developed by Prochaska and DiClemente, and it's been used in a bunch of health settings and other settings with great validation through its research about an effective model to help people move through stages of change. I'm joined by a panel of people today here who are going to help me discuss this, and then we will also show a couple demonstrations as part of this training tape. At this point, I'm going to ask the panel members to introduce themselves. Let's start over here with Jill on my right.
My name is Jill Richardson, and I work for the Department of Mental Health here in Jefferson City.
My name is Lexi Thompson, and I work for the Department of Mental Health in Jefferson City.
Hi, my name is Mickey McDowell, and I work for the Department of Mental Health statewide.
Hi, I'm John Harper. I'm with Missouri Vocational Rehabilitation in Jefferson City.
Thanks, folks. I'm glad that you're able to join me for this panel. Just by a little bit of overview, let's give you a little bit of information about stages of change. By no means do we think this is a comprehensive training, and we'd strongly advise that folks watching this or anybody working with folks with mental illness find out some good training about stages of change, but we want to introduce this to you and help you understand some of the importance of the way you might use this concept. Before we get started, I'm just going to give you a very quick overview of the stages of change and the model that we're using here. In this model, we'll start with the idea of pre-contemplation. Oftentimes people in pre-contemplation are not thinking much about making a change or don't have a lot of internal desired reasons to make a change. Most commonly, people consider pre-contemplation as an external reason for a change. For example, you might hear somebody saying, I need to get a job, and when you ask them why, they say, because my family tells me that I need to work, or my spouse tells me that I need to be out of the house. So they're really not thinking much about the change. In the second stage, known as contemplation, we have the idea of people starting to think about the change, but a lot of their thoughts or a lot of their actions towards making the change are sort of captivated by the idea of ambivalence, which in some ways holds people between the changes. Some people describe the stage of contemplation as sitting on the fence post of change. Not sure if I want to be in this side of the fence or I want to be on that side of the fence, but in the meantime, it's rather painful to sit between the two. So this stage is characterized by ambivalence, which is often confused with motivation, though it shouldn't be. Ambivalence really means these are questions or concerns or reasons that a person might have that are unsure for making a change, and not a way to indicate somebody's motivation to make or follow through with a change. The next stage of change after contemplation is preparation. In the preparation stage, we usually expect that people are taking actions towards a change, but they may not have started the change completely. Oftentimes people in the preparation change are people who have attempted changes before and may have some experience with a similar change process and may be using some of those same activities in the preparation stage. For example, somebody preparing to join a gym may not be actually going into gyms, but they might be out buying some new outfits to work out in a gym. They might be checking out childcare schedules so they can go to a gym. They might be checking out finances so they can plan on how to pay for attending a gym. And then the next stage for a lot of folks is what's known as the action stage. In the action stage, people are adopting and starting to use the change, depending on what kind of things you're staging. Some people require a certain amount of time. Sometimes with substances, people look for sobriety of a certain period for the early action stage. Sometimes for work, people look for actually starting the job. Some people look for going to interviews in a workplace. But in that stage, people's actions are consistent with the idea of where they want to be with the stage. And then the next stage is the stage of maintenance or ownership or relapse prevention, where the desired change has been put in place, and then strategies or techniques are used to help the person continue the desired change in an effective way. So that's a really quick overview of the stages of change. As I've said before, and we'll repeat throughout this training tape, this isn't meant to train you completely on how to use the stages of change. We hope this gets you thinking about how this model might be helpful for your ACT TAY team, how this model might be helpful for the clients you serve, and most importantly, how this model might be helpful for family members as they think about how they might interact with their loved ones and being supportive of them as they make progress towards their desired goals. Before we move into this demonstration, I'm going to ask each of our members if you might share a few comments about your experiences or what you've seen with the stages of change model and what's been effective or important in terms of that. Lexi, would you be willing to get us started with that?
Yes. From a clinical perspective, working where a person is at regarding stage of change is extremely important because of a concept called validation. Clinically, validation means letting a client know that you understand what they're saying and that you support them where they are, not where they were 2 days ago and not where they might be 2 days from now. And the reason why that is so very important is because when somebody is empowered to be who they are in this moment, they have the confidence to make changes. When we give them the message that they aren't in the right place or they aren't in the right stage by being ahead of them or behind them, then we can give them a message that may cause them or may trigger them to lose that confidence.
So an important part that you're raising here is if we're using stages of change and we're using it well, we're not only letting people know that we understand where they're at, but we're also telling them in some ways it's okay to be there in this change process for now. Am I understanding that correctly?
Absolutely.
Great. So that sounds like a really vital concept for a population that often feels misheard and misunderstood by folks working with them. Jill, some thoughts from you about stages of change and how it's been useful?
Sure. One thing that I found very fascinating about the stages of change is that it's useful in all parts of our life for everyone. So for example, I live in one town and have to commute to another, and there's going to be bridge work, and so I've got to go through this stage of change. Do I have to get up earlier in the day? Is it worth it to me to be to work on time? And so many times we make decisions in our life surrounding the stages of change, and we don't even think about it, that we're doing it that way. Or like you mentioned, going to a gym, seeing that you realize that you need to make a change, and then putting an action plan into place to do so. So I think it's important for everyone.
You mentioned it's sort of a universal perspective, and I'm wondering if we might even just try a little bit of that with you universally here. You mentioned, so there's going to be construction, it's on my route, I have to start thinking about another plan to get there. Does that mean you're at the action stage of change?
No, not yet. Not yet.
So if someone said, here's the right route, you need to take it, what might you do?
Well, I might start setting my alarm clock earlier so that I get up early enough to be, on time in case there's backup in traffic. And so those are things that I'd have to research. When does that bridge work start? When am I going to have to put this plan into place?
So it sounds like there's some preparation you'd want to do before changing your actions in that kind of an example.
Right.
Great. Thank you. Mickey, some thoughts about stages of change from your experience?
I think it's important to understand that the stages of change aren't necessarily linear. That an individual might be in one stage and then go back to another stage. That it's not a linear process, that we can move forward and backward through the changes. And also that we might be in multiple stages with multiple goals in our lives. That we shouldn't get confused that an individual is at one point and that's a static point for everything that they're encountering. I might be at one point for employment and at another point for relationships, at different stages. So I think that's very important for us to understand when working with individuals.
So if I'm hearing you right, one of the things that you're talking about is that people can be understood at the stages of change for different stages, for different things that they might want to change in their life. But I'm also hearing you saying that a stage doesn't characterize a person. Somebody's not a pre-contemplator forever. Somebody's not a contemplator forever. That stages of change are meant to understand where the person is at relative to that at a certain time, not to forecast who's going to make a change or be successful. Is that fair to say?
Yes, absolutely.
Great, thank you. John, I'm wondering if you could help us to fill in our understanding a little bit about stages of change from your perspective.
Well, I think in many cases, whenever you start talking about a theory, a technique, or something, I think it's unique to one discipline, in this case, behavioral health. I think people just need to be aware when they start practicing that this is becoming more of a universal language. We're seeing this used in educational settings. For instance, vocational rehabilitation. In Missouri, we've been in the process of bringing motivational interviewing techniques for the past 6 years to our counseling staff as well as management staff to be used with the people we serve as well as the people we supervise. So the language of stages of change is very common amongst all the people that I work with. So don't be surprised whenever you're working with a vocational rehabilitation counselor and they have that common language. It's kind of neat when you start thinking about that, because then you can very quickly get to the point of helping the individuals that you're serving.
So in some ways, if I'm getting this right, John, if I'm an ACT-A person, maybe I'm a vocational specialist or anybody in an ACT-A team, and maybe I'm going with a client of ours to a voc rehab appointment, it might be useful for me to have some ideas about being able to describe where that person's at, as well as some of the reasons I think that they're at that stage of change when we sit down for those meetings.
That's right, David. I think it would help you get there much more quickly with that VDR counselor. You know, obviously you're bringing them to that appointment. Perhaps you've already received that permission from the individual, and you might make that phone call or somehow communicate to that counselor prior to arriving where that person's at or what you've been working with. So it'd be a very quick way to communicate that.
So another opportunity not only to make our teams more efficient in working with the clients, but also to make ACT teams more efficient in working with other systems in the state of Missouri, which is important to everyone's success. Certainly. Great. Let's just pull together a couple points quickly that we've heard from our very talented group here about stages of change, and then we'll take a look at a demonstration. We've talked about, at least we're going to use 5 different stages of change in this model. We've talked about stages of change as a great way to validate folks. We've talked about stages of change as a relatively universal approach that can be used in personal and professional lives. But again, it's not an approach to pathology. It's not an approach to diagnosis. It's an approach to helping people change in the ways they want to and follow their desired changes. We've talked about the idea that not one person is in the same stage with all different things, and that people move back and forth between stages. And we've also talked about the idea about this can be a way where we can engage other services in the most effective ways to help the people we serve achieve their desired goals. A couple more notes before we move into our demonstration. One is, given all these changes, we need to assess folks frequently relative to their stage of change. One mistake is to say, oh, I know this person, I saw her last Thursday, she's definitely in contemplation about this. And as you all mentioned, dynamics might have changed, ideas might have changed. So to do good stages of change work, we're in a constant kind of, where is this person at? What are the signs for that? And then the second thing to reinforce around this, it's good to know where people are at. It's better to honor where people are at and interact to that accordingly. So one of the key concepts with stages of change, and I think I heard you mention this, Jill, is the idea that if somebody's at too advanced of a stage and we're too far behind them, we might be giving a message, oh, you're in the wrong place. Or if somebody is at a very early stage of change and we're too far ahead of them and placing an expectation or a request on them to go to that, we also might be validating, I'm not hearing you, I think you should be in a different place. So what's important about this, in some ways, it gives us an interpersonal language to connect with where the person's at. Just to review quickly, in pre-contemplation, sometimes giving the person some information. Somebody who might present with the idea of, I don't think that I have a problem with alcohol. I do drink 24 beers a week, but I don't think I have a problem. Well, would you be interested in seeing how many beers the average person drinks in a week? The person might say yes or no, but it's an opportunity for them to start to make, do I have something going on here that I might want to change? A person who's in contemplation, again, is caught up in sort of that ambivalence. One of the problems that a lot of people have is when they run into ambivalence, they ignore it. If we're doing good stages of change work, we actually do the opposite. We run into ambivalence, we explore it to help understand it and help ways that we can be helpful. As people move through the stage in preparation, often people need supports, validation. As they move into action and then they move into relapse prevention and maintenance, people often need new strategies. They often need revisiting of what were the reasons that got you here, as well as developing new strategies. In a work site, somebody might be in pre-contemplation about, do I go to an after-hours party? Somebody might be in pre-contemplation about, do I approach my boss for a raise? So we should think that people may and will develop new goals as we work with them, and we want to be careful about our thoughts where they are relative to that. That being said, let's take a look at this demonstration. In this first demonstration, we see an ACT-A worker who's working with a client who is at this point thinking about maybe working. Let's watch that video and come back and see what you all think about afterwards.
Hi, how are you today?
Good. I actually slept well for a change. I had breakfast with my friend Alicia, and she's always in such a good mood.
Well, that's great. I know that the weekend was kind of rough for you, so I'm glad to hear that that went well.
Thanks.
I wanted to see if we could talk about the things we've been working on last week. Do you remember those?
Yeah, we talked about what I want to do, and I think you called it goal setting.
I did. Do you remember some of those goals that we talked about?
Yeah, we talked about things I can do when I'm bored at my apartment and Alicia can't hang out.
Yeah, I remember you said that when you're at your apartment by yourself, you don't have a lot to focus on, and that sometimes causes your depression to feel worse. You also had talked about possibly going back to work. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I'm really not sure I'm ready.
Well, what makes you think you're not ready?
I just have such a hard time focusing, and my head gets all fuzzy and I get overwhelmed.
Well, see, I hear you saying that, but you focus with me and you focus with Alicia, so I think you would be very, very capable of returning back to work.
But at work, it might be different.
Talking with people here and talking with people at work, it's all the same. You'll do fine.
I don't know, I'm still not sure.
I think you're unsure because you haven't tried it yet. Let me ask you this. Why would you want to go back to work?
Money would be nice.
Exactly. Everybody works for money, so your motivations are right where they should be.
Last time I got so overwhelmed and people kept getting in my face and I got really angry and I started throwing things. Security had to be called in. It was so embarrassing. I don't want that to happen again.
Well, you haven't done anything like that with me or with Alicia. I have a lot of confidence that won't happen this time.
I don't know.
All right, let's change gears a little bit. What type of work do you think you might be interested in doing?
I don't want to work with people.
You don't want to work with people. Oh, so maybe something like third shift, like a security guard or something like that. Yeah, you can find positions like that in the newspaper or online. Tell you what, why don't you go ahead and fill out 3 applications that you find on your own, and then next week when we meet, we can kind of talk about your progress. I'm real excited to see what you come up with. Well, I think that's all for today. Thank you for coming in.
Thanks.
Well, that was an interesting video and perhaps not too uncommon of an encounter between an ACT-A worker and a client, in this case, with some discussions around employment. I want to just take a minute and check in with our team members here and see what you all think, any observations of what you saw in that video.
Well, one thing that concerns me about that style of interaction, it could make a clinician feel like they have to label their client as uncooperative. And so when you get into that situation, it becomes very frustrating for both individuals, for both the client and for the clinician.
So there's a little bit of sense there that they might have been at loggerheads at what they were talking about, and the clinician might have walked away with, we didn't get to the place.
Right.
Okay, great. Other things that you saw or concerns about that? Lexi?
Well, after watching that scenario, I got the idea that if I were in the place of the individual, I would have really questioned whether or not they cared about me.
So that sounds like that might connect back to some of the things that you were raising earlier about the idea of validation and folks really being heard. Is that something that comes up here?
Yes, as I was watching the scenario, it led me to think that the ACT-A worker just seemed to be so much more focused on the goal than they were on the person.
And any sense whose goal they were focused on in that moment from your observation?
It seemed like the worker was really driving their own goal.
Again, one of those challenges that we may run into frequently when working with folks. Mickey, any thoughts about that video?
I agree. It seemed that the ACT-A worker did not identify the correct stage to me. That maybe we were in pre-contemplation and they pushed for some action there and to go out and apply for some jobs. And I don't feel like the next time they meet, any action will be taken if she even shows up for the meeting.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I'd wonder about watching this. Did I feel heard? Is this person going to help me? And are they going where I want them to go? That kind of mismatched stage has sometimes been labeled by others as the idea of resistance. Yes. That resistance is sometimes that we as providers are at a more advanced stage than we want our clients to be, or they're not ready to be at yet. Is that what you captured a little bit of here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where the feeling that you're working harder than they are. And you're so ready to move forward, and here we are, we have this this great plan to move forward, but it's your plan and not the individual you're working with. And, I don't see why they won't work. And, they're not motivated. They're, well, no, they're not at that stage. They're not at the stage that you identified. You need to pull the reins back a little bit, identify the correct stage, and work with them where they are.
Back to that ongoing assessment, don't assume, evaluate where
absolutely.
people are at. Great.
Absolutely.
John, any thoughts about that video?
Well, just to perhaps roll it back a little bit, there's this sense of being overwhelmed. When you think about that aspect of it, being overwhelmed, you would retreat back to an earlier stage, perhaps.
So in some ways, the young lady feeling overwhelmed, feeling unsure, might even go back to maybe work isn't for me, maybe all the way back to that pre-contemplation.
Very much so. So meeting them where they're at, reassuring them, and helping them focus themselves on what are the pieces they get out of work. Why are they there? Why were they there to begin with? And reaffirming for them so they can move forward.
Thank you all. Let's take a look at another video, and we're going to, in this demonstration, we'll perhaps give the ACT-A worker a mulligan. Give them another shot at it, no penalty, and they can take another shot at this interview. And let's see if they do anything differently. When we come back, I'd like to ask you what they did differently and what seemed to be a strength, perhaps, of the ACT-A worker in this video. Let's take a look at that now.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm okay. I slept well last night for a change. I got to see my friend Alicia this morning, and she's just always in such a good mood.
Well, that's great. I know the weekend was kind of tough for you, so I'm glad to hear that went well.
Thanks.
So I wanted to see if it's all right with you if we kind of talked about some things we worked on last week. Do you remember what we worked on?
Yeah, we talked a lot about what I want. I think you called it goal setting.
I believe I did. Do you remember some of the goals we talked about?
We talked about what I can do when I'm bored in my apartment and Alicia can't hang out.
I remember you said that when you're alone at the apartment, it's hard to find things to focus on and you get bored, which makes that depression feel worse.
Yeah, I sit around and think about all the things that bother me.
Yeah, I remember you had mentioned that you get bored when you don't have anything to focus on at the apartment, which happens when you're alone, and that sometimes leads to the depression feeling more intense. But I remember that you mentioned possibly wanting to go back to work.
I don't know. I'm not sure I'm ready.
What makes you feel like you're not ready?
When I was at work, people got in my face and I couldn't focus and my brain just went all spacey.
I can understand why that would be concerning to you. Do you mind if I ask what do you feel like was interesting to you about going back to work?
More money would be nice.
More money? Reasonable. What else?
It would help me get out of my apartment. When I'm there by myself, all I do is think about everything that bothers me.
That's very reasonable. And you mentioned that you were interested in having more money. What would you do with that money that you would make?
I could really use some new clothes, and I'd really like a cell phone. Everyone has one but me.
That seems like a very good goal. But I also heard some things you're a little worried about. Can you tell me about what you would be worried about with concentration?
I can't go as fast as other people, and I worry that people are going to get in my face if I move too slow.
Maybe it would benefit you to look for jobs where you don't have to work at a fast pace. What do you think?
Are there jobs like that? Is your job like that?
Well, sometimes there's pressure at my job to work quickly and get things done fast, and other times there isn't that pressure. But I can tell you that there are jobs where you're not pressured to work as fast as you would be at your old job. I also wanted to see if you'd be interested in working with me and the ACT team on maybe building some skills to help you maintain your concentration at work.
Like what?
Well, for some people, medication can help them maintain their concentration, and there's also skills you can work on with me or other members of the ACT team, like deep breathing or other exercises that can help you refocus yourself when you're losing that concentration. But I also wanted to ask you about your anger. How do you worry that'll affect you at work?
At my last job, people just kept getting in my face, and I got really angry. I started throwing things in the store. I had to be escorted out by security. It was really embarrassing. I don't want that to happen again.
I can understand that. So it sounds to me like it might help you a little bit for us to help you find ways to avoid getting angry like that, or when you start to feel that anger coming on, maybe to manage it a little more effectively. Does that sound like something you might be interested in?
You don't think I'm too messed up to go back to work?
I'm not hearing that at all. I'm hearing that you've had a job before. I'm hearing that you are motivated to get out of your house and make more money, which are both very good reasons to go back to work. And I'm hearing that if you were to get a job, you'd want to be successful. Those are all very reasonable things.
So what do I do now?
Well, I'll tell you what I'd like to do, if you're okay with it. I'd like to talk to the other members of the ACT team and see what they think we could do to help you out as best we can in returning to work when you're comfortable. Does that sound like something you'd be okay with?
Sure, whatever would help, but I'm not sure I can do it.
That's a reasonable feeling right now. If you don't mind, I would ask for you maybe to write down a few things before we meet next time that you feel like we could do to help you feel more comfortable in going back to work. And then I can discuss with you ways that we can help you plan for getting a job in the future when you're comfortable. Does that sound like something you'd be interested in?
I think so.
Great. I think that's all we have time for today, but thank you for coming in.
Well, that was another helpful demonstration. I think what we saw in that video was an ACT-A worker, again, meeting with a client of an ACT-A team with a discussion about employment and her thoughts around employment and where she might like to go with that. In this video, I hope that you began to see the notion that perhaps the client is in some stage of contemplation. While she has some ideas about work and some thoughts about work, she also has some concerns about work from her history and what's going on with her now. So I guess I'd like to ask each one of you if you saw something different in the way that the ACT-A person responded to the client here, and what might be the benefit or what might be the usefulness of responding in a different way like that. Jill, would you be okay with getting us started?
You bet. This time I saw the TAE worker experiencing much less frustration and anxiety because before he was in a place where she wasn't at yet. And so he felt maybe that she was uncooperative. And so now as he slowed down a little bit and their ideas, their goals matched, he allowed her more choice and dignity to more drive that goal instead of him driving it. So it would reduce the TAE worker's frustration and anxiety. That's a benefit for him as well.
So in some ways, this might be a more comfortable approach, standing beside somebody who wants to move as opposed to behind and pushing.
Yes.
Lexi, thoughts about what you saw there?
Yeah, in this, going back to the idea of validation, in this scenario, what I saw was the TAE worker using matching that person's stage to give them the message that their fear is okay, that there is hope that we can work on that. Because we don't know at this point what kind of job that person might want. It could be that they might want a job working with a lot of different people, but they can't because of that fear. And matching stages means that that worker gets more information about what that person might want because they're giving them hope that it's attainable.
So part of that validation that I'm hearing from you might allow the young lady in this case to sort of talk more about, these are my fears of what's going on. If it's okay, I'll tell you. Maybe it's something you can help with. Is that part of what I'm hearing within that?
Absolutely. When you send someone a message that they're okay, then they'll tell you more about where they're at.
Great. So again, I think that comes back to that honoring and validating people around that. Nikki, thoughts of what you saw in there that might be useful?
Just to kind of hit on what both Jill and Lexi said, just slowing down the pace. In the first scenario, instantly, because we didn't want to work with people, we're going to fill out 3 applications for an overnight security guard, but never was that her choice. And I think by slowing down, we're going to get more of her choice and her preferences and what she might want to do out there, and ultimately have a better job match, which is going to be more of a success. So by backing up and identifying that correct stage and working through this, ultimately we're going to have better outcomes.
You know, you raise an interesting concept there. I think a lot of times that we have staff working in these ACT-A teams and other places who might actually feel a little sped up. either by productivity or by expectations of outcomes, and they might sort of then maybe unintentionally approach their work with folks in sort of a sped up fashion, if you will. And I just want to check this out. Is part of what you're saying is actually by slowing down to capture this, you might actually speed up the outcome because you might get to a better match and something that fits better over time? Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, a better outcome. I mean, to be client-driven, to be person-centered, to have the individual drive that by choice and by desire and passion of what they want to do, ultimately we're going to have a better outcome because it's what they want. It's what they want, you know, so they're going to have more buy-in to it. You know, they're going to put forth that effort that maybe we didn't see, you know, to begin with, because it's their choice. It's something they want. They're going to follow through. They're going to go for it, and they're going to stick with it.
Great, an important perspective. John, you've been very patient with being our fourth man up, and we're going to ask you to do that again. Thoughts of what you saw in the video there, John?
I think it's very important that we see pieces here of validating the person, slowing down, being able to focus, because in that relationship, as a vocational specialist, you need to understand that you're not an expert on every job that you see out there. Mm-hmm. You're gathering that information from the person and helping them identify what's going on, but you might be doing that yourself. You don't have all the answers. That in working with that individual, you can discover the answers together and then have ownership. So as Mickey's saying, you'll have a better job match. You can speed up by slowing down and focusing on what's going on here and now. Very often times there's just three things you need to get out of these type of meetings. You know, where's the person at? How are they communicating to you? And then how can you move forward with the plan for the next opportunity for success?
So part of what I'm also hearing about that, John, is you mentioned you're learning more about folks. I think sometimes, you know, maybe for some of our vocational staff on our teams, they might think I've been through, I've completed an inventory or I've completed a profile, I must know everything. Am I hearing you say that if you use this model, you'll actually learn new information throughout the process?
I think so. I think some of those inventories, they're as good as the moment that they were administered. And oftentimes that period, if you could use that to review with the person upon the moment that they completed it, that's great. But as soon as you separate from that over time, whether it's a day, whether it's 2 weeks, things have changed. You need to reassess and check that out. You'll still glean some information out of it, but it's not the ultimate goal that comes out of that. It's developing over time.
I want to thank you all as panel members for your diverse views about this and your information. This has been another training video for ACT-A teams. This has been using stages of change and working with the clients that you serve on the team. We hope that you will go out and find more information about this, consider how to use this model, and consider this as an important strategy for helping the young adults and their families that you'll be working with make progress towards important goals, dreams, and aspirations in their lives. Thank you.